Hi friends, Shanna Cramer here with Creatively Uncorked, and today we're going to paint Harvest Truck. It's the one right above me. And this is a new offering that we have in our art kits to go. We'll be adding watercolor art kits as well as our current selection of acrylic painting art kits and wood signs, crafts, among other things that we already have. So if you have not yet purchased an art kit to go, you can find those at creativelyuncorked.com. Click on the shop section, you'll find everything there. If you have purchased your art kit to go, and you probably have, you're watching this video, right? We have two offerings for the watercolor now. We have the virtual art kit, or on-demand art kit we're calling it, and that is one where you get the traceable, so you can sketch this out on your own paper, and then you get the video so you can paint along with your own supplies. If you get the full art kit to go, then what you're going to get is the watercolor pan, you'll get a brush, you'll get a pre-sketched sheet of watercolor paper, and you'll get video instructions. Our watercolor paintings will come with video instructions, not written instructions, just a heads up for you. A little about Creatively Uncorked. We opened in January 2014, and we've been a studio-based paint and sip studio for a number of years now, and we are now getting our entire library online. So I hope you'll join us and have fun painting. All right, let's get started. So this now is my Harvest Truck. We have a reference photo right up in the corner, and if you have an art kit, you have a reference photo with your kit as well. I have my basic pan of watercolors here, and if you're working with your own supplies, these are Prang watercolors, and they're really good. I'd say they're probably the best quality for student grade acrylic or watercolor paint. If you get these from us, you'll get the brush that came with your kit. If you're using your own supplies, then you should have a collection of brushes on your own. If you paint with us in the studio, these would be the brushes that you get, a bigger brush and a smaller detail brush. And that is what I recommend for this class. We aren't doing any large areas of color, we aren't doing any washes, so a couple of detail brushes are all you need. The brushes I will be working with primarily today, these are my own brushes. I have this mop brush, a small mop, and this pointy watercolor brush. This one is, even though it's a kind of a large brush, it does detail very well because of the fine point. Okay, let's get started. So we have our watercolor paints here, and if you're new to watercolor, we first need to activate the paints. One way that you can do that is by dunking your brush in the water and then just adding a little bit of water to each well. Okay, and that's going to take a couple of minutes, so go ahead and get started. If you have a handy dandy spray bottle, that's even faster. So the point of this entire step is to activate our paints. Watercolor is, when it's dry, it's not usable. You just add a little bit of water to it and then you can use it. Watercolor does not dry permanently. It can be reactivated at any point, which is really handy for if you just paint a little bit at a time and then walk away from it and you want to come back. It can dry out and you can come back and paint with it later. It's not a problem. You can't do that with acrylic paint. So that's one of the big differences there. Right? On this painting, I'm going to kind of start at the top, work my way down, and some areas will be built up in layers, so I will have to come back to some areas and reapply paint, additional paint later on. My only reasoning for starting at the top and working my way down is because I have a tendency to stick my hand in wet paint, and I'm just going to try to avoid that. So let's take a look at where my top is here. So I'll start here with my big orange pumpkin. I've got a couple of different shades of orange here. I've got this yellow orange, I have pure orange, and I have this red orange. And these are going to be primarily the paints that I'll be using. You might want to add a little yellow or heck, maybe even a little red sometimes, and that is totally up to you. But what I'm going to do is work light to dark in here. On this sketch, I've got my highlight areas all sketched out, and that's for a reason. That is to remind us to not paint in those areas. You can't get white in watercolor unless you leave it as paper. So that's probably the trickiest part. So I'm going to start here with my yellow-orange. Okay, another thing that I like to tell people is these are our pans. These are our watercolor pans. These are the wells. So we're going to be picking up color from the pans, moving it to the well for mixing. Reason being, you want to keep your pans as clean as possible. So you do all of your mixing in the wells. Okay, so I've got my yellow orange there. Then I'll go on to regular orange and just kind of blend that in right next to it. And then I can go to my red orange, and that's going to be my darkest color. Okay, so now I've got 3 colors blended together in the well, and that's a really good way to do it because we're going to be mixing colors together. They're going to be blending together as we go, so it's perfectly okay to have these mixed together. All right, so first thing I want to do, I'm going to start with my lightest color. So I'm just rinsing out my brush, dabbing that on the paper towel to take out the excess water, and then I'm picking up this this yellow orange. Okay, and this is going to be right along. We'll go ahead and fill in the entire segment of this pumpkin. Just remember to leave those highlights alone. Paint the whole segment minus the highlights. Okay, and then I'm taking my regular orange, just kind of dropping a little bit of that in the middle. And I'm drying off my brush here in between. So now I'm taking my red orange, load up the brush with some red orange, and then I want that to be my darkest color right along that inside of that segment. Beautiful. I think I could have a little bit more water in my yellow orange, so I'm thinning up my yellow orange just a little bit. I don't want to work on the segment right next to it because when they touch, the colors will bleed together, and they will touch. So I'm going to move on to one of these other segments. I'll skip a segment and move on over to the third one. So my lightest area is going to be near the highlight. So I'm painting that light orange around the highlight. There we are. Go ahead and fill in that segment. Okay. And if you have any water pooling on your paper, it shouldn't be pooling. Go ahead and absorb that again with a dry brush. Just tap your brush on the paper towel to give it to dry it out a little, and then just touch it down to your paper to soak up that extra water. You don't want water puddling anywhere on here. Not for this painting. Okay, and then I just go to my next darker shade, which is mostly the orange, and I'm just dropping a little bit of that in kind of on the center of that segment, drawing the brush again, and picking up the darkest color. So my darkest color again being that red orange. There we go. And you may run out of color in your well. Just go ahead and pick up new color out of your pans and add them to your well, and then add them to your pumpkin. On this part, because I've managed to stick my hand on the paper and it is smudging my pencil a little bit. So this is a kneaded eraser. This one happens to be brand new, but you can fold it and bend it and twist it and mush it a little bit like a stress ball. Convenient. So then just go ahead and dab a little bit. That's what I'm going to do, is just take some of that extra handprint right off of my paper there. Okay, lovely. Keep one of these handy. These are so handy for watercolor. They don't damage your paper like a regular pencil eraser will. If you ever have to erase watercolor paper, do it with a kneaded eraser. There's your pro tip. All right, moving on. Okay, so now I'm going to go back and fill in my couple of other sections here. All right, so I'm going back to the second section, and I'm starting off with my yellow orange and a lot of water, and just brushing that in. Don't forget the lightest part of this segment is going to be nearest to the highlight. And see how I'm just leaving the barest little gap there between this segment and the next segment, and that's just so the color doesn't bleed over, because the first segment no doubt is still wet at this point. My apple stem will be darker, so I can go ahead and cover that with the orange. Okay, and again, right over here, I just have the barest little skinny line that's unpainted, so the colors aren't touching. Okay, I'm going back. I dabbed my brush on the paper towel to dry it a little, and then I took a little of orange, which is my mid-tone color. I think I might see about thickening that up a little. There we are. Dabbing on the paper towel again before moving on to my darkest color, which is the red-orange. And adding that to the darkest area of my segment. I'm going to thicken that up a little bit and darken it. Okay, lovely, looking good. Add a little shadow down at the bottom there. Okay, and then I'll move on to my very last segment. It's not absolutely necessary to clean your brush every single time, but I do find it helpful. And some watercolor paintings are going to be a little bit more free-flowing and a little bit more loose than others. This is a very controlled painting, and so for that reason, I like to have control of the paint in the water. Everybody always starts painting with this tighter, more controlled style before they switch to a looser style, if they're going to. Okay, and there we go. That pumpkin is near complete. We'll come back and we'll add the stem after the rest of it is dry. We'll do all the brown at the same time. All right, we'll move on to our next big orange pumpkin. And if you've stuck your hand in that pencil again, just go ahead and take that up. All right, moving on, I have my light yellow orange. And I'll start kind of at the top and the back, and I have this really light color. I'm just taking off the excess water on the edge of the well, and I'll start with the furthest most back segment. And I think we can do a couple of them, and I think these are not main characters. These are kind of off in the back, so if the detail isn't perfect on these, it doesn't matter. We want these to not attract attention is the main purpose. So I'll even go into the third segment. Okay, and then I'll go on to my next color, which is going to be the orange or reddish orange. I just kind of picked up right in between those two colors. And I'll bring that right down here, right where the segments meet. It's going to be my shadow area. There we are. Okay, and then while those are drying, I'll move off over to the right-hand side of that pumpkin and finish the segments there. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to move on to the other side of the pumpkin and fill in those segments exactly the same way. I have my lightest orange, my yellow orange, and I'll add that to the back, the very last segment. I am again going to just fill in a few segments together right here. Like I said, these are the background, so it's fine. And the one thing that you do want to do is just leave those highlights blank. And I'm going to go 3 segments in on this side as well. All right, there we are. And if you see any water pooling, just take a minute to dab off the excess water on your paper towel, and then go back into your painting and then just pick up those puddles. We don't want any pooling or puddling water on this painting. And then we go back to take the darkest color, which is going to be the orange / red orange, and drop it into your shadow areas. I think I want it to be a little thicker than that. One tip, and this is with all areas of watercolor. If you are adding paint to a wash, and this is considered a wash, if you have an area of color that's pure, that's liquid and wet, whether it's clear water or whether it's paint, this is a colored wash because it's got paint in it. Whenever you're adding paint to a wash, to prevent the cauliflower edges, which are not very pretty. I know some people use those as design techniques, but they're not very pretty. Always add thick to thin. So that's the rule with watercolor. Thick paint you can add to thin paint, and it will stay put a little better and look a little nicer. Okay, now I'm moving on to this segment here. Starting over with new water, so I just rinsed out my brush a little, dabbed the excess water off, and then picked up my light orange, my yellow orange. So this is my lightest color. And this is really all about water control. Like I said, this is a controlled painting. So if you have too much water in your brush, just go ahead and dab the excess off in your paper towel. Okay, and then add the dark color. Okay, and then that one is going to, that color is going to blend and bleed, and that will look fantastic. Let's see, now I'm moving on to my next segment, and this is going to be a little bit trickier because I have wet segments on both sides. So I just have to be a little bit more careful about where I put this paint. If I touch paint on any of the edges, the colors will bleed together. And sometimes that's a desirable effect. In loose paintings, that's typically something that you'll do on purpose. Like I said, this is a tighter controlled painting, so not something we're going for on this one. Although if they bleed a little, I wouldn't get too upset about it. It's definitely not something where you want to stop the painting and start over. That would be crazy. You just let it go. Sometimes you just have to accept that it's going to do what it wants to do, which is often. Always. It's pretty much always the case with watercolor. It's going to do what it wants to do. And you just learn to work with that, is the name of the game. And if I need a little bit darker shadow in there, just a little bit, just a little touch of red right in the corner there. Okay, that is going to be just fine. All right. So now I have this nice bright red apple right in here. So I will go to my, I'll take that red orange again. And my base color is going to be a red orange. Okay, I'm mixing it up kind of thick here. It's still a little runny, so if you tilt this, you can still see that it's going to run, but not very fast. And I'm going to come and fill in my apple, all except for the reflections. There we are. So now we've got the red base, or the red-orange base, I should say. Now I'm going to come in here and take just red. Now this should be a really, really thick red, and that's not going to run. That's pretty thick. Okay, and then I'm going to add my darkest colors to my apple. So that's going to be, I'm just dropping in that super thick paint at the very top of the apple, and just kind of right around the highlight. And that's going to give it a little bit of a punch. All right, so I've got a little bit of color variation in there, which is nice. And that really dark red. Okay, while I'm at it, I want to go ahead and add that shadow in right where it connects with the stem. And the stem is going to be brown, but I think I can do this with a little touch of purple. Little tiny touch of purple. Mix with that red. So that's going to be a really dark color, again, really thick. Just going right into the base where that stem touches. Just dropping that in a little bit, it should spread slightly. Good to go. Okay, and then I can move on to my green pumpkins. So I'm going to start a new well of color over here. I'll start with green. How about that? We'll start with green for our green pumpkins. Okay, and then I have all of this orange left over, so I'm just going to grab some of that and mix it in. Well, that's kind of a nice color right there, isn't it? Take a little bit more of that into my green, as well as some more water. Okay, so now I've got my green nice and warm, nice and blended, looking pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to thin that out. I'm going to take one spot of thin, watery paint, watery green, okay? If you, if you end up with paint on your hand, try to get that cleaned off so you don't end up with it back on your painting somewhere. All right, so I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm starting with my back segments. This time I'm trying to put my hand down on the edge of my paper and rest my wrist on that, and that way I'm not sticking my dirty painted hand onto the paper. Okay, similar to that larger orange pumpkin, I'll do a couple of segments at a time. So I think I'll do, ooh, looks like I forgot to draw my highlights on this one, so I'll have to just be a little more careful and pay attention to where my highlights should have been drawn and try to fill in around them. Okay, and because I'm painting, and this is all entirely going to depend on how quickly you paint. If you are a very quick painter, maybe you can paint more areas at once. If you're a slower painter, you'll want to do keep it to a section at a time. Because you just need to work with each area while it's still wet. So now all I'm doing there is taking this thicker paint over on the right-hand side of my green well, because I've thinned it out on the left side, but the right side should still be pretty thick. There we are. So now I've got it light green to dark green, and I've got even a little bit of a highlight in there. All right, back up to this top right portion of the pumpkin. There we are. So I'll just get a couple of those segments at once. Remember to soak up any puddles if you see any water puddling. Okay, and then back to that dark, thick green. And I'll just drop that into a couple of areas. And we'll do that a little bit more. This is going to be my dark, thick green now. There. Just a little, not too much. Let's not go overboard. And if you do go overboard, you can always lift some of that back out again. Just dab a dry brush, and by dry I mean thirsty brush, like you tap it on your paper towel until you absorb most of the water out of it. And then when you touch it down to wet paper, it will want to soak up that water. So that is one way to absorb some water. All right, I have that last segment left. Cleaning the brush, dabbing it dry, going and picking up my light green. Again, I'm missing my highlight area, so I'm just going to kind of sketch that in lightly. The tip of my brush, and then paint around it. So I have kind of a lot of water in the brush there. So I just kind of tap that on my paper towel again to get the excess water out. There, and then I'm just filling in the whole segment of this pumpkin. Be sure to go around that rear view mirror. It's kind of a tough thing to see or pay attention to, but it's there. Okay, there we are. And then I'll go into my darker green. Make sure it's not too watery. So I just picked up a bunch of that color and then I held my brush down on the paper towel, hoping that it'll soak up most of the water and leave most of the color, which is what I'm after. Oh, not enough, not enough, okay. There we are, now I've got a dark green. And I call it dark green, but it's really a pretty neutral color. I'm just mixing that orange and that green. Just orange, just green. Simple as that. And that's going to be my shadow color for the greens. I will want to come back in here and add that color a little bit more on some of these areas. There. All right, that pumpkin's looking pretty good. I'll move on to this one. I think I'll try to make this one a little bit lighter. Maybe not too much lighter. Okay, again, starting with the backmost segment. On both sides. And I think I'll do this one as well. So now I'm doing every other segment. And that's just to make sure that my edges stay dry and I don't get too much color bleed. There, soak up the puddle if you have any puddles. And let's move on to that dark color. A little bit of orange, a little bit of green for our dark color. And I'll drop that in kind of right around the edges. There we go, just dot, dot, dot. I'm just touching a little color right around the edge of those shapes. You can blend it out a little bit after that if you like. So this is a slightly different technique than we did before, but it's very similar. Same principle. Okay, I might want to wait for that one to dry just a touch. So one thing that I want us to pay attention to is the color of this truck, which is almost beige. It's like almost white, off-white. And when we do this color, there are a couple of ways we can do this color. One way of doing it is to try to mix that color, which is, if you're a brand new watercolor painter, that can be a little challenging. Lighter colors are more challenging because it's basically tinted water. One thing that we can do once we get toward the end of this painting, what I plan to do is use our dirty water. So we've been rinsing our brush as we go along, and this water is going to be tinted pretty much exactly the right color. So some of our trucks are going to be a little more orange, some of our trucks are going to be a little more green, some trucks might be a little more brown. It doesn't matter. It's just a color, okay? And no matter what color we end up using, it's going to match our painting perfectly because it's our dirty water. So that's a nice pro tip for you. Dirty water is a color. All right, so now I think I can go on to my next couple of dots of that green pumpkin. By dots, I mean segment, of course. And leave some highlights if you can. Okay, looking good. Pick up your thick dark color, drop it around the edges. Be sure to pick up any puddles if you have any. We don't want puddles, just color. All right. And you've noticed, I'm sure by now, that you do need to watch these edges of each of these vegetables as you add them in, just because that is also creating the edge of your truck. With acrylic, we could just easily paint over that. With watercolor, not so much. With watercolor, you have to pay a little bit more attention to where your edges are. And so we are doing pretty well on our vegetables there. So we'll want to add a little touch of brown. I am lucky enough to have brown in my palette here, so I'll just pick some of that up and mix it into my green. Give it a little flavor. I don't like to use any straight colors, any pure colors. They all get blended, they all mix, and it just it gives them a little more artsy appearance, a little bit more texture, more interest. So again, I'll try to not stick my hand in wet paint, and I'll go up here to this light brown pumpkin stem. Okay, leave some gaps. Not too much water. Leave a few gaps in there. Maybe some highlights, maybe some twists and turns. Maybe you want to add a little touch of more green on one side. And you can just drop that right into the wet paint. That looks lovely. Let me see, I can maybe zoom in just a tish more for you. But I don't want everything to fall off screen. Okay, so the downside of this is you can't really see what colors I'm picking up, so I'll just have to try to talk you through it a little bit better. All right, so I'm going on to the next, which is going to be my green and brown. And this one just about matches that pumpkin, doesn't it? And we'll have to make sure we get some more brown in there. Okay, wiping off the paint, picking up more brown, just touching it into the well. I like to do that for two reasons. One is so I'm not adding pure straight paint out of the pan to my paper, because I don't want to do that at any point ever, really. And the other reason is to kind of blend it with the colors that I already have, because it just looks a little better. Okay, just a slightly damp brush here, and then I'll come back and lightly blend this just a little. Just a little, not too much. I do want to separate the pumpkin from the stem though, so I'll blend it a little bit on that side. Okay, I don't mind having a couple of highlights here and there. That kind of looks nice. Onward to the big pumpkin. And we'll have a few different shades of pumpkin stem in here. And I did draw the highlights on these, so kind of pay attention where the highlights are. And if you want to add a little bit more green at any point anywhere, that looks fantastic. So I added a stripe of green, went back and picked up some more brown. Kind of like that greenish brown look. Maybe I'll even take a little touch of red and put in there. Huh? Why the heck not? It's my pumpkin, I'll do what I want. Plus, I feel like that little bit of variation in color there is kind of the defining feature of watercolor. It's what makes it beautiful. Okay, lovely, lovely. All right. We have this big stem over here, which is mostly green, so I'll just go back into that lighter green. Back to sticking my hand in the paint I see. Okay, so I've got my green stem there, and then I'll drop some browns into that. And this you might be able to see a little better from the side angle camera. All right, that's looking pretty nice. I'll drag some of those, not so much, okay. Little tiny bits of browns right down along the shadow area of the segment. And that will help tie in my colors a little bit. Okay, looking lovely. All right, so that is it for our pumpkins, and one dot left on the apple. Let's go with that really dark red purple again. Not a lot of water, keep it pretty dry. And done. Leave it. Don't keep messing with it, just one little draw. So if you have a small brush, switch to your small brush. And if that was your small brush, keep using it. I have this brush, which I don't like to use a whole lot because it's kind of ratty, and ratty watercolor brushes are not winning. Otherwise, let's see here. Maybe I can switch. Yeah, so this is my liner brush. Long bristles, long soft bristles. It doesn't hold a lot of water, but it holds more than a short bristle brush. So what I'm doing next is I have these little leaves that come off the edge. My sketch isn't very detailed here. I don't want to sketch leaves, I would rather paint them. I just want an indication of where that's going to go. I have some swirlies, some little pumpkin vines that are going to be coming off the sides over here and here, more leaves off the top. Again, just barely of a sketch there. I don't really want to have lines on that part. I just want to draw those curly cues where I want those curly cues with my paintbrush, this paintbrush. So I'll take some of that green again. I'll maybe even brighten it up a little happier green in there. So, and that was my yellow green. I just dipped it in with my kind of brown mixture in here. And you can see how we started out with a very clear oranges in here, and now it's like green. When then it switched to brown, and now it's something entirely else again. So I'm going to go with my happy green, and I'll come out here, and I'll go curly, curly, curly. You see, and it will run out of water eventually, so that's something that you got to watch out for. Okay, maybe I want to do a little bit more orange and do another one. And green and brown make orange, or I mean, green and orange make brown. And you've seen that already multiple times throughout this painting. So something brownish, something orangish as we go in here is just fine. So I'll come off of this pumpkin. So now I've got green stem coming out of my orange pumpkin, orange stem coming out of my green pumpkin. And I like it that way. And then maybe make some more up here. These are fun. Have fun with this. Make as many curly cues as you want. Make blue ones, make orange ones, make red ones. I don't care. It's your painting. Careful with the blobs of color though. See, I think I want some more orange ones. Maybe this yellow orange. Yeah, we'll give it a little bright, happy color. Okay, is that enough? Do I want one more? Okay, so now we're going to move on. Excuse me. We have a little bit of leaves down here and a little bit of leaf up there. And I think I'm going to go back to my regular smallish brush for this, just because I can do little dabs of leaves a little bit easier. So I will take whatever color this is and I'll go boop, there's my leaf. Pick up the next color, boop, and the next color. And this should get a nice little variation in color as we go. Maybe even a little more yellow, huh? So we're just changing the colors slightly with each little leaf that we put down, all the way up to the end. And then when we're done, assuming we made these very quickly, we can just drag that drag a little connecting line right between them all. Okay, and then we'll do the same up here. A little boop, little boop. Pick up the next color. Ooh, how about brown? Maybe we'll do brown. Why not? A little brown in there. Looking pretty good. All right, so I'm going to leave that there. All right, we've got a couple of leaves. And let's move on. Okay, top half done. We're moving on to the truck now. So some truck detail. Let's see if we have enough dirty water here we can fill in our truck. I think we probably do. So I'll just start down here. And is that tinted enough? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe we want to take a little bit of this color. And because my spray bottle's faster, I want a lot of water, a little color. A lot of water, little color. Tinted water, remember that's the color we're after here? That will be the color of our truck. Mine's going to be a little bit on the greener side today. If there are any areas that you want to be specifically highlighted, do not fill them in, do not paint them. Even though this is barely a color we're working with, it will show. So if we want to highlight in there, we're going to leave the highlight in there. So if we want any highlights around that headlight, maybe around this bumper area is probably going to be pretty dark. We'll leave some chrome blank. Okay, we'll add just a touch of color to a few areas on that rear view mirror. We want a lot of highlights on it though. And we can add shadows to this part later as well. Okay, now this side's getting a little dark, so I may want to just dab that with a paper towel before it dries. And maybe just add a little touch of color over here while I'm at it, just to kind of even it out. Okay, and then I want to get this, the hood. I'll try to just address the shadow areas of the hood. Roof, I mean. There we are. Don't want to go overboard there. We're mostly trying to get this to read as a truck, so that is not too tough. Okay, so now I have this bumper in here, and the bumper should be more gray. And my gray that I'm using is a combination of orange and green. So I'll just pick up some of that orange and green. And now I didn't draw the line for the highlight, but you can see that the bottom half, or slightly more than half, is filled in with a darker color. And it maybe doesn't need to be this orange. This is pretty orange, so I'll just go for a little more green. There we are. Then just to even it out, maybe a little more orange on the second half. All right, so that is the base color of our truck. If we want to add a few other touches of color in there while we're at it, maybe we want some reflections of the orange, we can just drop in a little orange on the edge. Maybe even over here a little touch of orange. Maybe we can do a little touch of greens somewhere. Keep it light though. And this might seem kind of intense right now, but watercolor dries lighter. Okay, maybe a little touch of color over on this side. And maybe we can even try a little darker brown along the hood. Okay, yeah, something like that. Some shadows, so we might have some shadow edges here around the headlights, just kind of drop in a little color around the headlights. And this isn't our darkest color yet, we're not there yet, but this is our medium tones. So anything that's a medium tone, go ahead and fill it in. Going along the edges, some again, keep your hand out of the wet paint. Okay. There we are. Anywhere else we want medium colors. Let's see. Maybe a little bit on these bumper things. Oh, what are they called? Anyway, they're bumpers. All right. And then I want to get up into the gray a little bit around in here. And for that, let's see, I might add even a teeny tiny little touch of black to my gray, just to make it more neutral. Okay, and I'm dabbing off the excess water into my paper towel here. And maybe I should zoom out a little more because I know I'm working in detail, but it's hard when you can't see what colors I'm picking up. And it might be more helpful to see all of the colors, because I am mixing this, you know, soup of colors over here, but still I'm picking the colors up from over here. And if you're watching this on a big TV later, you'll be able to see the detail. Okay, so any more with our medium colors? Let's see. So I have my gray that I just mixed up with that little tiny touch of black. Thin it out. Okay, so here's where I have some slightly darker details. There, just some little shadows right around some edges. Another shadow right around the window. Now this is my medium dark color. So this is my next stage darker. So I have more shadows around the windows that I might want to add with this. I have an even darker shadow. Let's see, I'll mix up my, ooh, little dark, not that dark. Okay, so I'll just take a little bit of that and mix in my brown. So there's my kind of dark shadow color. So I want to go around some edges. Okay, so I can go around the headlights a little. I know I have some dark, shadowy areas around the bumper. So now this, I'm just adding my darkest shadow. And you don't have to have full complete lines for it to read as a shadow. If you have broken lines in there, that is just fine. Before I get any darker, I want to take kind of my medium gray, if I still have a little bit of medium gray here. If you don't have medium gray left, add a touch of water to your dark gray, and that'll become medium gray. So I know I want to fill in my chrome area around the grill here. Maybe even a little lighter. Okay, and then from there, so to fill in these areas, just press and pull a line across. One line, that's it. Press and pull. Okay, so if you want a little bit darker in there, then you can just kind of drop some of that darker black in, or your darker gray, I should say, while that paint is still a little wet. If it dries out, it won't blend, and we're after just a tiny, small amount of blend. All right, so now we're getting some darker colors in there. I know I have my dark in the windows and my dark in the wheels, but I'd like to add a little bit of color first. So I have some blue in my eyes or my headlights. So I'll just take a little tiny bit of blue off over to the side over here. Not very much, just a little bit. Makes it kind of thick so it's dark. Pay attention to your highlights again. Kind of a highlighty area there in the center. Okay, and then I'll just take a slightly darker and just drop the darker, thicker color right around the edges. Some edges. Okay? All right, and then I'll move on to the next one. Again, watch for the highlights. And in this case, I'm just darkening it up with any color on the edges. Purple looks nice. If you would rather use your black or your dark gray, that is perfectly fine too. All I'm doing is just giving this eye or this headlight just a little bit of an edge. Okay, leaving it at that. If you end up with dotty dots and you want to smooth it out a little, you can certainly do that too. Just make sure you don't have too much water in your brush. That's key. All right, picking up a little red again because I've got my red lights in the front. Okay, a little bit of red. And just go ahead and paint in that circle. Not really highlights on these, although if you left some highlights, that would be just fine. Now I'm just darkening some of these edges, and this is just my darkest dark color. So if that's your black or your dark gray, go ahead and drop a little bit of that in on some of the bottom edges. Okay, so now I have my red lights. All right, so now this time when I go onto my dark gray, I'm going to use my soup of color here, but add a little bit more black to it. So I want it to be a little more on the neutral side. I think for these windows, let's see, I'll want to pay attention to where my highlights are with that. I have it pretty dark on the left side, and then it kind of fades to white on the right. So, hand out of the paint this time. I'm just going to draw right around the edge, the left edge of that windshield. Okay, and pay attention to the highlights. Down at the bottom, I've got another corner highlight. Okay, adding a little more water to that, and then I'm just going to drag right across the windshield. Smoothen some of my lines here. I've also got this extra shadow over on the right-hand side, and that's really going to help define our windshield. Okay, and if you need to come back with some clean water and kind of lighten up any of this area, help smooth it out just a touch. There we are. And we have a windshield. I'll make a slightly darker line just right along the bottom. Again, just to help define the edge of our windshield. Lovely. All right. So on to my next dark detail, which is my, what do you call this? It's not a hood ornament because it's flat. Anyway, the decal on the front of the vehicle. Okay, and that is mostly black. If you want to leave a highlight, that'd be a great idea. It looks like I missed mine, but highlights can go everywhere, and kind of highlights sort of make the painting, so don't be afraid to use them. It's pretty tough to overuse highlights in a watercolor painting. All right, I think that's pretty good, so I'll just add a few defining details around the chrome. Okay, I'm just touching up a few edges, adding a few areas. We have slightly darker shadow on this edge of the bumper, along these sides. And this isn't something that you're going to do everywhere, but it just can help bring out a few areas. And if you step back from your painting and take a look at it, you'll really get an idea of what might still need to be done or what might not need to be done. I see one thing right now I'd like to do, and I've got my orange highlight over here, but nothing over here, so I'm just taking a little touch of green. I'm just going to add that little bit of a green highlight. Color reflects color, so this would be reflecting green from that green pumpkin. And, yep, getting down there. I think I'm going to add a touch more blue right on the right edge of that eye headlight. Kind of looks like an eye though, don't you think? Okay, and then I'll take a little more of that black and just add the darker shadow on the inside. And that kind of closes that up a little. And that gets also my blue to blend in a little, which I don't mind at all. That is a case where bleeding edges looks pretty good. All right. I'll move on from there then. So basically the last thing that I have is my wheels. You could add a shadow under this if you'd like to, but I didn't add any kind of a shadow in the original. So I have a not pure thick black. It's kind of a slightly thinned black, and I'm just going to fill in my wheel. And then I'll drop my darker blacks into this. Okay, so the same principle we've been learning all along. This is kind of a wet into wet wash. So I'll just go ahead and take some black now, pretty thick black. And I'm just kind of bring that in here and there. There, and that's going to help define my wheel. Okay. Back to this thin gray black. Oh, maybe a little thicker than that. Let's see, a little darker. And over to the other wheel, fill it in. Okay, and then that thick black. And kind of drop in that thick black sort of where you want it. Some of it will stay a little bit, add some texture. There we are. And then so at this point, all we're doing is just taking an overall look at all of the final details and seeing if there's anything that needs to be fixed or adjusted. So I'm just going to tilt it. You can see how that in the light, it's still pretty wet. So that, and it will lighten a little bit as it dries, so it'll dry a little more gray than black. So I'll give you a close up here. So that top leaf got a little smudgy, but that's okay. I'd say the truck color is looking pretty good. The pumpkins are looking pretty good. You can still see the pencil lines in mine, and that's okay. I don't mind the pencil lines. They kind of add to the artwork. If you prefer to erase your pencil lines, get yourself a kneaded eraser. That's pretty important. And then go ahead and erase them. You can erase. Just wait till your paint is completely dry. So if you wanted to come back in here and remove some of these, if you have painted over it, you'll have a lot more trouble removing pencil lines. But some of these, there's just no paint over at all. I painted up to the edge, but not over the edge. So then in that case, they are removable. See if I can get a couple of them in here, and I'll show you. Here's a really good example. Okay, so take a look right up here on this stem. Where I painted over those lines are not going away. Okay, they won't be able to be erased, but up on the edges, on the pumpkins, a lot of those lines did erase. So if you have painted over it, it won't erase. If you haven't painted over it, it will. Just a general rule. I draw my lines dark on video just so you can see the lines, but when you're drawing your own lines for your own painting, you don't have to draw them this dark. All right, so I am going to let this painting dry, and here is our harvest truck. Thank you for painting with me today. I'm Shanna Cramer, and this is Creatively Uncorked. Sign up for your next art kit to go, or live painting class, or heck, in-studio painting class at creativelyuncorked.com. Feel free to check out our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, even our Patreon, and I'll paint with you again soon. Have a nice day.